Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into a really powerful and frankly confrontational story that Jesus told just a few days before his crucifixion. It's the parable of the wicked husbandman from Matthew chapter 21. Okay, let's dive right in. The story kicks off in verse 33 with this setup that would have clicked immediately with Jesus' audience. See, this imagery isn't just about some random farm. It's a direct callback to a famous passage from the prophet Isaiah, which was a huge signal that he was actually talking about the nation of Israel. And what's so incredible here is how every single piece of this opening verse is a symbol for God's relationship with Israel. The householder, that's God. The vineyard itself represents the nation. The hedge, the winepress, the tower, those are its protected borders, the city of Jerusalem, and of course the temple at its very heart. And most importantly, the husbandmen, the tenants, they represent the religious and political leaders who are supposed to be taking care of it all. And this is where the trouble starts. Verses 34 and 35 tell us the owner sends his servants, these guys represent the prophets of God, to collect the fruits, which are a symbol for the righteousness and obedience God was due. But the tenants' response, it is immediate and it is violent. They don't just say no, they attack, showing this really deep-seated rebellion.
This wasn't some one-off thing. The parable is pointing to this long, tragic pattern throughout Israel's history. Think about it. Zechariah was stoned right in the temple court. Jeremiah was beaten and thrown in prison. And even John the Baptist, the most recent servant before Jesus, was killed by Herod. Jesus is basically holding up a mirror to their own dark history of persecuting God's messengers.
So after the servants are all rejected and killed, the householder makes one final, ultimate appeal. Verse 37 says he sends his own son, the heir. And this is a massive turning point in the story. You can almost hear the owners thinking, surely they will respect my son.
But reverence? Not a chance. Instead of respect, the son's arrival sparks this deadly conspiracy. Verses 38 and 39 tell us the tenants see their big chance. They actually recognize him as the heir, and they think, hey, if we kill him, we can grab the inheritance for ourselves. It is the chillingly direct prophecy of the exact plot against Jesus by the religious leaders, who saw him as a threat to their power.
So, after laying out the whole story, Jesus does something brilliant in verse 40. He turns the tables and asks the chief priests and elders listening a question. He doesn't pronounce the judgment himself, no. He makes them the judge in their own case, forcing them to deliver the verdict on the very characters they represent.
And here's the kicker. In verse 41, without even realizing it, the leaders totally condemn themselves. Their answer is swift and, just. The wicked man will be destroyed and the vineyard will be given to others. This foreshadows two things: the historical destruction of Jerusalem that happened in 70 AD, and the transfer of spiritual leadership to a new group, first to the apostles and then to all believers.
Jesus then connects his parable to a prophecy they all knew. Verse 42 quotes Psalm 118, which was a psalm everyone would have been singing during Passover week. He pivots here, changing the metaphor from a vineyard to a building, and identifies himself as the stone that the builders rejected. But that becomes the most important part of the whole structure.
So what does it even mean to be the head of the corner? Well, the cornerstone was everything in ancient building. It was the main, load-bearing stone that aligned the whole structure. So what Jesus is saying is that the very one they, the builders of the nation, are tossing aside is the one on whom the entire kingdom of God depends.
And this is where the hammer drops. In verse 43, Jesus makes the judgment explicit and personal. He looks right at the leaders and tells them that the stewardship of God's kingdom is being taken from them and given to a new nation. And he doesn't mean a political state, but the community of believers who will actually produce the righteous fruit God is looking for.
Then verse 44 lays out two possible fates related to this cornerstone, and it's a really stark warning. You can either stumble over this stone and be broken, which means being humbled when you encounter Jesus, or you can have the stone fall on you in judgment, which will grind him to powder. That phrase is a direct echo of a prophecy from the book of Daniel about total destruction.
So, how did they react to all this? Well, the message was definitely not lost on them. Verse 45 says it plainly. They knew he was talking about them. They understood he was calling out their failures, their history of rejecting God's messengers, and their current plot to kill him.
And here is the ultimate irony. After hearing a story that perfectly laid out their rebellion and its disastrous end, what do? Verse 46 tells us they immediately tried to arrest him. They literally fulfilled the role of the wicked husbandmen in real time, completely blinded by their need to hold on to their power. The only thing that stopped them was that they were afraid of the crowds.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. This parable wasn't just a prophecy, it was a final, merciful warning. It forced its audience, and really it forces us, to ask ourselves how we respond when we hear truths we don't want to hear. Do we humble ourselves and change, or do we just try to silence the messenger?